5 questions or so. Quite a few questions anyways. The first one is, we have sermons and lessons often about our spiritual responsibilities to each other and the lost. What are our personal physical responsibilities to the congregation we are members of? And so I began, of course, kind of where anyone else might, I would think. The first thing that pops in my mind, of course, is gathering. And of course, that would go to Hebrews chapter 10. And in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 25, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much more as you see the day approaching. And now, it's pretty hard to put out the physical, and we'll be talking about that as we go through, that there is no connection spiritually. So even if you were to go and buy a meal for someone, that's a physical act that you can do, but there is a spiritual application that's involved in that particular monetary or physical deed, if you will. But there is no doubt over in Romans chapter 12 that we are to minister to one another. And so there's a whole gamut of things that are listed here. And so if we begin at verse 4, Romans chapter 12, beginning in verse 4, for as we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same function, so we, being many, are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. So we're members of one another. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, I believe it is, it's talking about the eye and the ear, and if the whole body were an eye, where would be the hearing, and that kind of concept. And so the idea that both my feet, legs, hands and arms working together. You think of holding a baseball bat and so on, and there's motions with your feet, and going and swinging, and that follow through, and so on and so forth. And you want all of these different body parts to work in unison, to work together. So that concept is what's being expressed here. And so in this sense, there's a function of my hand that's different than my eye, but both are needed. Having then gifts, in verse 6, having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us. Of course, that would come from God, these gifts. Let us use them. If prophecy, let us prophesy in proportion to our faith. Or ministry, let us use it in our ministering. That's a pretty broad term there. He who teaches in teaching. He who exhorts in exhortation. He who gives with liberality. He who leads with diligence. He who shows mercy with cheerfulness. And then there's a whole list here in verse 9 beginning. Let love be without hypocrisy. Don't fake it. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. Well, that's obviously spiritually speaking. In verse 10, though, be kindly affectionate to one another in brotherly love and honor, giving preference to one another. How do you do that? Well, we're given some instructions as it follows up. In verse 11, not lagging and diligent, fervent in spirit, that obviously is spiritually, but serving the Lord. Well, how do you serve the Lord? You serve the Lord by serving one another. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfast in prayer. How do you do that? Well, it's by being together. It's by supporting one another. And we would see definitely in verse 13, distributing to the needs of the saints, given to hospitality. That is that idea of pursuing hospitality. And so that's a physical thing that you're doing, but in the process what you're trying to do is exhort. You're trying to build up. You are being kindly affectionate to one another in brotherly love. You're giving preference to one another. Please come over to our house and we're going to serve you in that sense. Bless those who are persecuting you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Although that can be done in a face-to-face type. It would be most, what we might say, effective. Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. It's the physical contact. And so you have that physical connected to the spiritual act or the spiritual motivation is followed up by the physical act. Be of the same mind toward one another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. So there's that association that is involved, and that's not a long distance socialization. It's kind of funny with this COVID, and so when you see the commercials, we're in this together apart. You know, well, I understand the concept, but we can't really, in a sense, put our arms around one another because we got to keep our 6 feet. But at the same time, that's exactly what's needed is for us to comfort one another, and sometimes that best comfort is a hug. You know, expressing yourself physically with someone. And we're kind of reluctant to talk about intimacy, but there is an intimacy between brethren found in that hug that doesn't have to be sexual whatsoever, but it is a bond, a closeness. And there are men in my life that I would not hesitate in hugging, and they will hug me back. They're not like, you know, but there's no misgiven in that. And so we, again, being emphasized, but associate with the humble, rub shoulders with the humble. You know, birds of a feather flock together. We need to be together. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Repay no one evil for evil. Have regard for good things in the sight of all men. If it is possible, as much as depends on you, live peaceably with all men. Beloved, do not avenge yourself, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. Therefore, if your enemy hungers, send him a coupon to go to McDonald's? No. Feed him. There's the physical. You're doing something. It is an interaction. It's a face-to-face. If you thirst, give him a drink, for in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And we have a tendency, if someone hurts us, push them away. You're not going to be a part of my life. I ain't going to have anything to do with you anymore. That's the worldly way. It's not the godly way. And so it takes that physical, that interaction, if we're going to really be loving like we ought to be. I have more to talk about it, but go ahead, Doug, and share your thoughts, please.
Well, I interpreted this a little different way. I got more of the last part. What are our personal physical responsibilities to the congregation we're members of? And I started by answering with Romans 8:16. In Romans 8:16, the Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God. And if children, then heirs. Heirs of God, joint heirs with Christ. If indeed we suffer with Him, that we may also be glorified together. The main thought here that I'm picking out is that we're a family. We're children of God. We're a family. We have been adopted into a family. And so what is our responsibilities to the congregation that we're members of? Well, in 1 Timothy 5:8, he says, but if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So we have a responsibility, since we're a member of a family, to take care of that family. And therefore, any member of that family, we're going to look out for. If they need something, we're there to help them. There is a worldly saying which holds a lot of truth. Blood is thicker than water. We have become blood. We're blood brothers and blood sisters. We're blood. And therefore, we take care of our own. And then finally, I put down 1 John chapter 4, the 20th verse. If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? If he hates his brother, what does that mean? Does that mean that I want to kill my brother? No. It means that if I don't love him the way I should love him, if I don't accept him as a brother, then I have no part of God. God has no part with me. This is why I continually ask the question, if you can't get along with your brother here on this earth, what are you going to do in heaven when you've got eternity facing you? If I can't worship with my brother here on this earth for something that he said or something that he's done, then how am I going to get along with him in heaven? My answer to that is, I won't be there. If I can't get along with him here on this earth, I won't be there. I won't have to worry about getting along with him in heaven because I won't be there. He may be, but I won't be as long as I have that attitude. Because John says, if you hate your brother, if you don't love him like you should, then you have no part of God. God has no part of you. That's my answer to this is we are a member of a family. We have been adopted into a family. How wonderfully well it is with us that we are members of this family, and how much we should love our fellow members of the family that have been adopted just like we have, and serve them as we need to.
Yeah, over in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 9. 1 Peter 4 and 9, be hospitable to one another without grumbling. That idea of opening our homes and sharing a meal, it was definitely, it's spoken of, it's commanded a few times, and there's certainly, and we see the example of Mary and Martha having Jesus and possibly all the apostles over. That we talked about that this morning, and the stress that Martha was under to prepare this meal and so on. We just mentioned briefly as an example, but there is a strain, and it's easy for us to do things for others, but then kind of grumble about it along the way because we have our own interests. But to be hospitable is a physical act to do something, to prepare this meal and clean the house and everything that would be associated to that. But we would see over in Galatians chapter 5 and verse 13 also, Galatians 5:13, for you, brethren, having been called to liberty, only do not use liberty as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love, serve one another. Now this is kind of plucked out of a context, and I'm not going to elaborate on the context, but this principle here is that we can do whatever we want to do, but we need to choose. And that's where we say, well, what does it mean to esteem our brother greater than ourselves? Well, probably the biggest way is that we serve. We serve the other and not ourselves. And so through love, serve one another. And that requires taking out time to weep with those who are weak, rejoice with those who rejoice, to take the meal, to open our homes, to make the phone call, to go to the hospital to visit someone who's sick. In Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10, Hebrews 6 and verse 10, for God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love, which you have shown toward his name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. Now, that's a physical act. That's doing something. It's not just praying for them. It's not just saying, well, I see that you're hungry. I see that you're thirsty. I see that you're cold. Have a great day. I'll be praying for you. And you slam the door in their face. Of course, James chapter 2. So we've got to put it into action. So again, the motivation is spiritual, but the application is physical. It's fulfilled in a physical act to do something, to serve, to minister. We would see in Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. It may be that it's spiritual, that's the basis of it, but you're going over to a brother or a sister's home and you are praying face to face with them. You're taking out time out of your schedule and they're struggling with something in their life, whatever that may be, and you go and take time to spend with them in the study of God's Word and prayer or what have you. Now, one of the things that really stands out to me in regard to the physical in how we serve one another, we minister to one another, that I find interesting. Over in Acts chapter 9 and verse 39, we're going to look at we're going to look at an example, and then we're going to look at a command or a qualification in regard to true widows. So this is about Dorcas. In Acts chapter 9 and verse 39, Dorcas has passed away. She's obviously someone who was a faithful servant of God. Then Peter arose and went with them. When he had come, they brought him to the upper room, and all the widows stood by weeping, showing the tunics and garments which Dorcas had made while she was with them. And you can't help but think of the little old lady sitting in the rocking chair crocheting. That's what I envision in my mind anyways. I'm not saying that Dorcas crocheted. I don't know exactly, but she made tunics and garments. These are physical things that this woman was noted for, and here they are bringing all of them almost as a treasure, as a testimony of what this woman did. It may be preparing that meal. It may be that you make mittens for someone in our 1 month of cold weather or 1 week, here in Yoakum, but it's the idea that you physically make something that's going to benefit, to minister to someone else that still has that spiritual application. But it's really where the rubber meets the road. It's not just in mind. It's not just in thought. And if there's any false statement that people have kind of clung to, that idea, well, it's the thought that counts. I understand the connotation, but no, it's got to go beyond the thought and be seen in how we treat one another and what we do for one another. So, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 9 beginning. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 9. There are absolute qualifications that have to be met by a true widow in order for her to be supported by the church. Now, in our day and time, we throw that responsibility on the shoulders of the government. I am not certain by any means that is right in the eyes of the Lord. For us to say, okay, well, they're taken care of, they're getting a pension, or they're getting Social Security, really dealing with Social Security, and they're barely scraping by, but they're getting by. And we think, okay, well, they're all right. When maybe we should be supporting them out of the church's treasury, of course, is what we'd be referring to. So in 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 9, notice how the physical would apply to the qualification for a true widow. Do not let a widow under 60 years be taken into the number, and not unless she has been the wife of one man, well reported of good works. If she has brought up children, if she has lodged strangers, if she has washed the saints' feet, if she has relieved the afflicted, if she has diligently followed every good work. That's a doing. It's not just been in the temple praying, but that she's done a good work. But she's washed the saints' feet. She's lodged these strangers. So we see that she's physically involved in the lives of, in this circumstance, strangers. Now they could be Christians, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be. And that's the hospitality that's typically noted in God's Word, that true hospitality is opening your home to that stranger. And we think, oh, well, we can't do that in our day and age. You can't put your family at risk like that. You think it was any different then? Do you think that there were any bandits back then? Do you think that there were any people who murdered back then? Not necessarily has time gotten worse as time has gone by. In fact, we have murder right there in chapter 4 of Genesis. But we see that this woman's active, physically active, as far as her work in the church, in the kingdom. It is involved with others and cooperation with others, helping others, ministering to them. Anything else on this?
No.
Okay. So the second question